Hey, so now our next group of tissues is the connective tissues. So remember, their job is to connect and bind things together. So let's look at the different types of connective tissues. So they bind structures together, provide support and protection, fill spaces, produce blood cells, etc., etc. So the main things, the really important thing about connective tissue is this one right here, the matrix. This is what sets connective tissue apart. So in the epithelial cells, where we saw that they're all closely linked together, there's no space in between each of the cells. In connective tissue, there is space, and sometimes it's a lot of space. And we call this the matrix. So the area in between the cells we call the extracellular matrix. It's not living, it's not made of cells, but it's made of substances that the cells themselves have produced and have packed around them, essentially. And it may contain these types of fibers. So these are protein fibers that the cells produce and put around them. Collagen fibers, which you've maybe heard of before, this is a very important protein we see in animals. Elastic fibers and reticular fibers. So there's different types of connective tissue. The first one we're going to look at is fibrous connective tissue. And there are three subtypes of fibrous connective tissue. There's loose, dense, and reticular. So loose connective tissue, this is also called areolar connective tissue. And the cells of this tissue are called fibroblasts. And what they do is they produce a lot of collagen and elastin fibers, and they put it around the cells. This is a very common type of connective tissue in the body, and it's around many tissues, it's around many organs holding them together. One example of loose connective tissue is adipose tissue. Adipose is a fancy word for fat, basically. So adipose tissue is a type of loose connective tissue, and its job is basically just to fill up with lipids to store. So here we go. So this is a picture. On the right we have the actual microscope slide, and on the left we have a drawing of what that might look like. So these kind of almost diamond-shaped structures here, these are the fibroblasts, and they have a nucleus in the center. These are the cells. Notice that they're not closely packed together. They're scattered among all these fibers. And we have collagen fibers here. We have elastic fibers. All scattered in among this area. Now these fibroblasts, they produce these fibers, the proteins of these fibers, and excrete them out into this matrix. This area all around the cells is considered the matrix. So there's an example of areolar tissue. Here's adipose tissue. Now, adipose tissue is a little bit different just because the cells appear to be pretty closely packed together as they fill up with that fat. But this is still considered a connective tissue. Okay, the next one is dense connective tissue. This one has thick bundles of collagen fibers. So this type of connective tissue we find in tendons and ligaments and aponeuroses. So tendons connect muscles to bones. You've probably heard of those before, like the Achilles tendon and things like that. Ligaments connect bones to bones. So you have ligaments in your joints that are holding the bones together. Sometimes people tear their ligaments, like their ACL. You may have heard of somebody tearing their ACL in their knee. That's a ligament. And then aponeuroses connect muscles to muscles. One example of a place where we see this is in your abdominal muscles. So you have your muscles, and they're connected together by this connective tissue, dense connective tissue. There's dense irregular connective tissue as well, and this is found in the dermis. The dermis is the lower layer of your skin. So we have the epidermis, which is epithelial tissue, and below that we have the dermal layer, which is connective tissue. This is where all the blood and nerves are that are found in our skin. So it's a very common type of connective tissue just because it's all over our body and our skin. So here's some examples. Here's some dense regular connective tissue. Notice how it looks like it's patterned. It's very thick. There's not as much open space as we saw in the loose connective tissue. Here are all the nuclei kind of packed in there, the fibroblasts, and they're producing these fibers that form the tendons or the ligaments or whatever it might be. Here's the dense irregular, so still densely packed, but it's not situated in the same fashion as the regular connective tissue. So here's our skin, Here's the upper layer, the epithelial, and then we have the dermal layer below that. So here's the epithelial layer, here's the dermal tissue here, and this is all this dense, irregular connective tissue. And then we have reticular connective tissue. So these cells aren't called fibroblasts, they're called reticular cells, and there's only reticular fibers. And this is found in lymph nodes, the spleen, the thymus, and in red bone marrow. So this type of connective tissue is associated with a lot with our lymphatic system, which has a job of protecting our body. So that's our immune system as part of that lymphatic system. Okay, the next type of connective tissue is cartilage. So you've heard of cartilage. We have cartilage in our nose and our ears. The cartilage is a layer on the edges of all our bones, in our joints, in between our vertebrae and our spinal cord. So cartilage is a type of connective tissue. The cells are called chondrocytes, and these cells are found in little spaces inside the tissue called lacunae. These are little spaces, like little houses. And then they produce the cartilage, which they pack around themselves. Now cartilage is avascular, meaning that there's no blood supply. So we saw that before. Cartilage is avascular, meaning that it heals very slowly. So if you break a bone, we'll talk about bone in a minute, but there's lots of blood there, so your bone heals relatively quickly. But if you break your cartilage or damage your cartilage, it's very slow in healing. Three main types of cartilage: there's hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. And these are found in different parts of the body. Hyaline is the most common, and it only contains collagen fibers. This is what's in our nose. It's also the ends of the long bones, as I was talking about in our joints. We have hyaline cartilage that's making a smooth surface for our joints to move. And it's also found in the trachea. And this is also what's found, so when we're a little tiny baby growing, our skeleton is first made of cartilage and then it's replaced with bone. And so originally our skeleton was made of hyaline cartilage. Here's some examples of hyaline cartilage. So you see the chondrocytes, these cells, in this little space, the lacunae, and then you can see the collagen fibers that have been packed around. It looks a little bit similar to dense connective tissue, but the difference here being these spaces here, which you can see. So this is fibro. So this is all three types of cartilage here. So we just talked about hyaline cartilage. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. We just talked about hyaline cartilage. The one I was just showing you was fibrocartilage. But so here's the hyaline cartilage. But the same thing, you can see the chondrocytes here in the lacunae, and then the fibers that are packed all around. Elastic cartilage found in your ear. So here's elastic cartilage. So let me get to this, and then we'll go back to that picture. So it has elastic fibers, which makes it more movable, and we find that a good place to find this is in our ear. So here you can see, again, the chondrocytes in these little spaces, and all the fibers packed around. And then finally we have fibrocartilage. It also has collagen fiber, just like the hyaline cartilage, and its job is to absorb shock. So it's found in between the vertebrae, these vertebral discs, if you've heard of discs, or if you've had a disc that slipped or something like that. Anyway, so as I was saying before, here are the chondrocytes in the lacunae, and then the collagen fibers that have been packed around. It looks a little bit like dense connective tissue, but it's cartilage. Alright, the next type of connective tissue is bone. Bone is considered a connective tissue. Same sort of idea here. We have a matrix, which is a bony calcified matrix. It's produced by these cells in the bones called osteocytes, and their job is to produce that bone. We have two types of bone. We have compact bone and we have spongy bone. The compact bone is found in the ends and the edges of our bones, and spongy bone has bone marrow, and that's found inside. Let me show you an example. Found inside the bone. So here's our long bone here, and you can see on the edges we have compact bone. And compact bone is made up of these rings called osteones. We'll talk more about this when we get to the skeletal system, but just to give you an idea, here's these rings called osteones. And within these rings, you see these little darker spots. Those are the spaces, the lacunae, where the osteocytes are found. It's called the lacunae, just like in the cartilage. That's where the cells are found, and they are producing this bony matrix. Notice that there are blood vessels and nerve vessels, nerves, not nerve vessels, but just nerves, running through the bone to nourish and help it grow and things like that. So here's the compact bone, and then we have the spongy bone inside. So notice that it has a lot of spaces and things like that. That's where our bone marrow, particularly our red bone marrow, is going to be located. That's producing red blood cells and other blood cells inside our body. So that's the bone tissue. Blood is considered connective tissue. Now blood has cells, so the red blood cells are the main type, but it also has white blood cells. And then it has a matrix. A matrix is basically everything else around the blood, which in this case is a liquid matrix. But there are fibers that can form when we get like a cut or something like that, and a clot is forming. There are things that can form these fibers, but they're normally not functioning unless they're needed. So that's the blood cells there. Here you can see the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and what we call the plasma, the matrix around the blood cells. Alright, so those are our connective tissues. You can see them here. This one's I think this is a little more complicated than the epithelial. Epithelial is pretty straightforward. You got your layers and your shapes. But here we have some different categories. We have the fibrous connective tissue, the loose and dense and reticular, the cartilage, hyaline, elastic, and fibril, and then bone, compact and spongy, and then blood. So you can see the types, the structure, the cells, and the examples of where these are found inside the body.